Hi everybody, thank you for joining our webinar on leveraging workplace data in your return to work plans. In today's session, we're actually going to be covering the importance of why you need to start return to work plans now, how to leverage workplace data in your strategy and manage day-to-day building operations, understand the drivers influencing work style changes, and demonstrate why the workplace needs to be fluid and adaptive. When looking at returning to work, there was the phase one employees. These were the ones that were essential workers. They couldn't possibly do their work from home and needed to be in the working environment in order to do their job. Typically, there were far less than 5% of those in the office, and it was minimal complexity in that there was a desk, that desk was fixed for them. Every time they returned to the office, that would be their desk of choice. Then there were the phase twos. The phase twos for those that had difficulties or challenges working from home, either from a technical aspect or their environment. They're in a shared housing environment with multiple people or had young families. And again, that was typically very low percentage of people that needed to be in the office environment. So relatively minimal complexities when it came to being space that was available. So therefore they would have their own desk environment. And again, when they came in, that would be where they would sit every time they came into the office environment. And these are very much the priority ones, if you like. So those are the ones that needed to have a space and as and when. Then there's phase three. And phase three was a higher complexity when it came to rotating into the office. These were those that could work from home, that already been doing working from home very successfully. However, there was now a need to come into the office periodically. And the reason for that was that it was okay sometimes, but there was an occasion when you would want to spend some time in a different environment. Now, what we found over the summer months during 2020 as Europe opened up a little bit was that actually this became quite a logistical burden. As well as having to have your line of business manager to be able to support this, as well as having facilities being able to aid and support this, there was also the involvement of HR. And all those elements had to be supported and enabled and know who was in the office and at what time. And this quite quickly became quite an administrative overhead and quite a burden on the organisation. But we're still very much in need because how to support those employees wanting to come in on a rotation basis. What we found is that being able to have space and being able to hold a space open for each individuals was the best way forward. So for example, for those that were being able to come in and were fixed, so these phase one and phase two, where you're always going to be in the same workspace, was very much a fixed desk environment. That fixed desk environment, as shown on here, was the red dots. So it's a desk that would be used every time you came in. This would be where you would sit. And then the pink dots here are the semi-fixed. So these are these rotations. This is the phase three that we're talking about. And when we look at lockdown one, that was still relatively low. And even with relatively low people wanting to come back into the office on a rotation basis, we know that became that high challenge. So what do we know now? So this was all very much based over the first lockdown and how life's been through 2020. From a UK perspective, now we're in lockdown 3. What is the data telling us? What we're seeing is that 95% have cited that they want to go back into the office. That's quite a significant shift to how it was when we were in lockdown 1. We're seeing that's been quite widely reported that 70% more people are making the journey into the workplace, comparing between lockdown 1 and lockdown 3. Now, some of that is because more workplaces are open and therefore there is actually going to naturally tendency to be more movement. But there is also that higher drive of people wanting to return into the office. They're wanting to spend time in the workplace. The reason for that being in lockdown 1, it was new, it wasn't something we were aware of, and it had that sense of temporary. Whereas now there's that sense of it's gone on for a long time, and how can I build that into my working life now, now that it's been a longer challenge? When we look around the globe and we look at the APAC region, New Zealand could go back to occupancy sort of 40 to 50%, but it was still very much remote hybrid working and very much in a rotation pattern. Japan, similarly, around the same percentages. They invested heavily on the remote technology, and that's again a general trend we're seeing globally, because it's about looking at technology that's suitable for remote working, but also gives that same consistency when you're back in the office. So therefore you can have the same experience no matter where you're working. When looking at Singapore, the government advocated that employees must work from home at least 50% of the time. What is clear is that no matter where we are in the world, we are all following similar patterns. We are all having the same challenges that we need to understand, and we can all see that rotation is definitely a phased return to the workplace. And terms like hybrid working are becoming the natural things that we need to plan for. When you look at some of the data, we saw that 90% want a blend of flexible working. So they want to be in the office 2 to 3 days. Again, that's actually quite a shift, because although 2 to 3 days was talked about towards the middle and end of last year, certainly we saw more around the 1 to 2 days, but it's definitely seeing a sign of increasing. 40% need to interact and socialise with colleagues. There's no real change on that data. There's still a percentage of people that see that need for social interaction. But what is interesting is the new stats on here, 42% found too many distractions working from home. Again, that's quite a shift. Is that because before it was temporary, or a view of being temporary, versus how it has been now? What's also clear is employees are taking time to think about what they'd want to go to the office for. If they're thinking about working from home and then returning to the office, why would they want to go in for those sort of tasks? Therefore, looking at different working environments is becoming quite key. Will I be going in for planned meeting areas? Will I be doing telephone conversations from home, or will I be doing those from an office environment? What type of meetings will I be having? Are they informal, unplanned, so that I can catch up with individuals? And collaboration areas. Our collaboration areas are going to become a lot more important, because what type of collaboration is needed for what type of space? Will you need a whiteboard? Will you need to have somewhere you can connect with technology? Will you just be planning to sit down and to having a space where you can chat to colleagues and share ideas and brainstorm? So knowing what type of collaboration space is required and where definitely needs monitoring. So all these points, when we're looking at the data, when we're looking at the increase in mobility of people, the higher people are wanting to return to work. Therefore, we can look at phase 3 and start to understand that this is going to be an area of critical change. How do we support that? I think it's fair to say the phase 1 and phase 2, so the priority employees, is kind of managed now. We've got into a rhythm of that. We're used to that. But phase 3 is a constant changing of numbers of people, either decreasing or increasing how they want to spend time in the office. So being able to understand that is really, really important from a return to the office phase, where we're still having to be very, very mindful of capacity of how many people can go into the office, but also getting used to it from a business as usual. If we're going to have a hybrid working environment, how is that going to look in the future for us? If we look at all the data points as we've been looking, and we're comparing this very much from a UK data specifically around lockdown 1 to lockdown 3. At lockdown 1, it was very high, 100% remote working, very comfortable with remote working. We often heard a lot of things about perfectly productive at home. Interestingly, I would often want to understand the difference between productive at home or business continuity, because there is a difference, same as with how you are in the office environment. So when we look at lockdown 1, 44% only essential workers travelled to the office, and yet now we're seeing an increase of plus 17% taking that journey to the workplace. In lockdown 2, the stats were that 19% were more productive, felt they were more productive in the office. But when we look now, we're seeing stats of 42% found that many distractions were when working from home. So it's fair to say that hybrid or rotations or all those types of working environments are going to become a part of our everyday working life, not just for the phased return to work, but how we plan and how we support in the future. So you can expect from a return to the office perspective to really think about that fixed workspace and how much additional semi-fixed workspace you're going to need. So that's those that are coming in. On here, it talks about when employees work 2 to 3 days in the office. That's more thinking longer term, but in the short term, purely from a return to office pace, they may want to come in once a week or once every 2 weeks. How do you manage that rotation, and how can you support that safely and effectively? Moving forward, we can already see that the blend on the hybrid working will be, there are those that are going to be 100% in the office. We already know that. The phase 1 and phase 2 has told us that, but there will be others that will want to have more of 100% office presence. There are those that are going to want to have 100% working from home. I suggest probably minimal, because there will still be a very small percentage where they may want to be in the office environment, but that category still exists and will exist. And then there's those that will be combined, which is probably where the majority fall. And that's the one where understanding data becomes more critical to understand what impact that has and how behaviours are changing. Because that group will be combining between office and home and how that all fits together. When thinking about going to the office or going into a work environment, it's very much thinking about what's the type of task I'm going to be looking to do. Will I be doing individual work? Will I be looking to work with other team members or colleagues and collaborate in that way? Will I be looking at small work groups, or will I be needing meeting room type scenario? It's one point to look at it from an individual, what type of working environment are they going to need to think of for the task they're looking to do, but it's also very much around the individual and their circumstances. For example, if I was to do a day with lots and lots of calls, I will probably stay at home because I can do that in this environment and I can actually have those calls readily. But if I was living in a shared housing environment, or if I had children around me, or if I had a difficulty from home, if my partner's working from home and therefore we're both on calls, I'd probably want to put time to go in the office and find somewhere logistically where I could do that. So it's actually putting that combination together. What is the task? Where in the office could that task be fulfilled? Or do I want to do that from home? It's almost like my home becomes another workplace choice that I could choose to work in. When we look pre-COVID, on a typical office environment, I'm going to say typical because there are areas like consultancies and things like that would have a different demographic of how that would support. However, if you look at it from a standard office point of view, typically Monday to Thursday would be very high in peaks, and the average utilisation would vary from day to day, but you would see peaks and troughs throughout the day, except Friday. Friday was typically a quieter day. Friday was typically the day that had the lowest average utilisation and had the most underutilised seats. If we combine forward with all the data that we currently have and all the information that we currently have to us today, mixed with how we've seen behaviour be in the past, if people are saying they're going to be coming in the office 1, 2, maybe even 3 days a week, is it fair to say that they maybe won't choose Mondays and Fridays to come into the office? Is it fair to say that as people want social interaction, Wednesdays and Thursdays may become much busier days in the office? How is that going to be managed? How are you going to make sure the workplace stays relevant, stays easy, accessible for people that want to go in there for certain tasks? And how do we keep with the agility of how that's going to change significantly over the coming months and years as how the interaction with the environment changes? If you plan and look forward and think about how things will be as close to business as usual as we will get, we start to see that a sort of rotation, if you like, and I picked this as almost a neighbourhood or team environment, where you would have a mix where some people are choosing to be fixed, some people are choosing to be semi-fixed, some are semi-mobile and some are mobile. And therefore you would expect to see more on the semi-mobile and mobile side because that's where people are going to be moving around. So what might have started is where you had 20 fixed and 15 semi-mobile and 5 mobile and 8 mobile. By the end, you might see a rapid change and see that change significantly. And therefore it will change the amount of desk space you might necessarily need. Collaboration spaces is something that's really key to measure, because understanding why people are coming to the office and what types of areas they're engaging with is going to be really key to understand how you manage that space, but also keeping the environment relevant for those that want to come into the workplace in order to do activities. If it's not relevant, people won't necessarily choose to go there. As well with meeting rooms, there's always been challenges on meeting rooms of people overbooking or not turning up to meeting rooms, etc. But how is that managed? By understanding how those meeting rooms are utilised. At the moment, they may well be used for phone calls for privacy. Unlikely they could be used for larger meeting groups, but at one point that will come back. But measuring that and understanding how that changes over time is going to be critical. Being able to see what meeting rooms are being used by how many, to know which meeting rooms you may want to repurpose, but also how people are engaging with that space. When you think of occupancy, it's also thinking about the environment and what impact that has. The higher the levels of occupancy, plus poor ventilation, will equal an increase in CO2 and an increase in the recirculation of virus across the building. When I would be in an office, typically the only things I typically noticed were whether I was too hot or whether I was too cold. I probably noticed in meeting rooms, if I'd been in there a long time with a number of people, that I felt that it was difficult to keep concentration levels up, but didn't necessarily keep that directly linked to the increase in CO2. But now I'm very aware. I'm very aware of a virus, I'm very aware of my well-being, and I'm very aware of environmental factors. So measuring this to ensure that people can feel safe and can understand that data is captured and collected in order to provide as much safety as is possible. And being able to understand the occupancy levels as well as environmental factors will help to understand about circulating fresh air, and also being able to preempt any possible issues that may be coming up with regards to the environmental factors. When measuring things like CO2, for example, being able to have the data is one thing, but also being able to do something and be proactive about it is key. And having alerts where there's something critical that may need to be supported. We're often asked how this is captured. We capture it a number of ways. So we use different hardware depending on the type of data we want to collect. So for example, sensors for desks versus sensors for counting footfall or over meeting rooms, and also the environmental factors. All of that data gets captured and put into an easy to use interactive dashboard for you to drill down on that data and be able to see and gather insights in order to make changes and adapt to the information that you are seeing. We also support with other areas on top of that as well. So for example, additional reporting, deeper dives into the data that's captured to give you true analytics and looking forward. With regards to the management of space, there is also the practical management when it comes to booking space. Now, we all know the challenges we had with booking meeting rooms. So what lessons can we learn from that if we were to roll that out, not just for meeting rooms, but also to think about desk space? If I'm going to travel into the office, I at least want to know that there's space available for me to do the tasks I need to do. So being able to book a space which is safely available, therefore I'm not going to be able to book a space next door to somebody else. It's keeping in mind their social distance protocols, and then can also be able to move those aside when as we start to gain more flexibility in that area. But being able to book that space is one thing. What that does is enable me to make sure that when I do go somewhere, I have a space. We know by human behaviour, if someone doesn't turn up, we want that space to be available again very quickly, so it can be repurposed and reused. Again, this is moving forward to business as usual world. But the key thing is not just understanding how to book space, but also understanding how to manage the occupancy and the utilisation as well. So understanding booking versus actual usage is critical to understand how your office or your environment is actually being supported. For example, I may book a desk for an entire day, but I may go and do many other tasks during that period of time and spend a fair period of time away from that desk environment. It might be that it's fine to book a desk for a whole day. It certainly would be on return to the office phase, but actually I would still like to know how often that space is used. When looking at starting to gathering the data, after the planning phase, it's really about gathering that data early and as quickly as possible, because gathering that data, you will see the change in behaviours, you will see the impact that air quality has when occupancy changes. You will also be able to see how those changes impact the environment that you're working in and what type of engagement people are doing. And the reason it's so critical to start collecting data early is because we have seen such a change in behaviours already between where we were in 2020 at the beginning of all of this to where we are today. So you can absolutely say with certainty that the dynamics and how things will change over the next 12 to 18 months as those come back into the office will be significantly different. And monitoring that and understanding and being able to be agile enough to be able to support how employees engage with the office is very key. Now, in the previous slide, we had a small section on the planning phase, but let's not underestimate that. There are a number of key areas that need to be covered. Understanding who needs to be in the office and when, how that can be sorted, how that can be supported, engaging all the stakeholders, all the different areas that collaborate on this approach. So IT, corporate real estate, facilities management, workplace colleagues, HR, all of these areas have a key area of supporting all of the logistics and all of the environment and all of the employee elements that are really important. And when you're thinking about the technology, it's how can you also help from what we need today versus what we need in the future? For example, how could booking with occupancy support with track and trace processes to make that as seamless as possible to support and engage on that front? So the key takeaways from this is to start planning now. I know I've just covered that point, but the one thing that you have at the moment is you have probably a relatively low engagement currently with the office environment. What that means is the one thing you could probably do is the logistics to get anything installed or implemented or running. You actually have an office available, probably a little bit easier to do that as opposed to when everybody starts to come back and then trying to sort that out. So thinking about that is key now. How the purpose of the office will change. So rethinking the workplace, what purpose does the office serve, and what work patterns and behaviours change. So really monitoring how that changes over time and keeping it relevant is really important. Leveraging workplace data, so understanding how the teams and departments are using the office, what different elements are they engaging with the most, how does that need to support each employee to want to come back, and this is another place that they want to be in. Gathering employee feedback is key all the way through this process, keeping it a safe and clean environment for somebody to come back to, but also that it remains relevant and suitable for the tasks that they need to do in order to perform their role. Constantly monitoring and being able to analyse all this data enables you to have the agility in order to be able to adapt the workplace as things change and as things are supported moving forward. You can only do that by gathering the data and then being able to be in a position to act on it. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.